Hello and welcome to the Bearded Respect. And we will be right back after this intro video. Hello and welcome back to the Bearded Respect for guess our Halloween special. And we would like to welcome Eric from the Uncomfortable Podcast.
Hey guys, how you doing? Thanks for having me on tonight, man. Hey, I don't know who does the video work for you guys as far as the intros and the reels that I saw earlier today, but nice job, man. Really nice job. I had a lot of compliments, on that today. That was really cool.
Oh, that's great. Thanks. Appreciate it. So, Chris, you want to welcome some of these nice bearded people and women into the chat?
Yeah. Hey, Steven, good to see you. I know you can't always catch us. So good to see you here tonight.
It's awesome, Steven. Good to see you here.
Now we got Becky, Miss Bruce City. And Bearded Wolverine. Jay, how you doing? And I think this is maybe a fan of Erick's. Laura.
Hey, Laura.
Hi, Laura. Thanks for coming in.
Yep. We got Vato. Posting a link there. Let's see. Steven. Oh, there's Russ Young.
What's up, Russ?
A new member of the Bearded Rebellion Beard Club.
Yeah.
And then there's E-Rock.
What's up, E-Rock?
Looks like we're caught up.
E-Rock says you never had a beard.
Yeah, it's there. It's there. I had to tuck it in.
No, you guys are making me
meant
symbolically challenged because I got baby hairs compared to what you guys got.
Oh, you look fine.
I actually I just went back to having a goatee after having a beard for I don't know, probably the last 3 years. I think beginning of the week, end of last week, I shaved it down to goatee again, and I don't know, had a couple of days, and I was like, no, I'm gonna let the sides come back out again. So,
It's the unveiling of Chris.
Yeah, he ain't even here.
I know.
No, you ain't here yet.
It'd be
I'm
too
not-
hard
I'm
to
not
go
gonna
through
take-
that stuff through the whole show.
I'm not taking anything off on this, okay? Okay.
Why? I hope not.
Hey, Mark. Well, I seen up here earlier, Laura said, ask Eric to take off his mask.
Ouch. Thanks, Laura.
Oh,
You got one coming your way now, dear.
Well, for anybody who doesn't know Eric, he hosts what do you call it, a paranormal?
My tagline is topics that reside on the fringes of our reality. So
Yeah.
paranormal, supernatural, spiritual, cryptid, extraterrestrial, anything high strangeness is welcome and encouraged on my show. So and
Well-
I think I've got a pretty good variety of stuff out there. So
Well, yeah, that's great. And I actually really enjoy the show. That's those kind of podcasts are just right up my alley.
well, I appreciate it. Thank you.
Pretty entertaining. Even watching as you progress through the different topics. And you started off pretty interesting in the earlier episodes.
I was really fortunate early on to have landed some really good interviews. And I don't know, I mean, you guys, I'm sure you put some thought and there was some framework to deciding to do what you guys are doing here. And I did the same thing with mine. The one thing I wanted to absolutely not deviate from was I wanted to be honest. I wanted to provide a safe space for whatever the topic is, whoever the guest is to come on, to not run into any kind of judgment or I don't go into an interview with the idea of a list of questions that I'm going to ask this person. There might be some bullet points that I want to cover if they're known well for a certain thing. But honestly, I have found that some of the best information, some of the best commentaries come from just having a good open conversation and paying attention to what people are saying. Ask questions about things that strike me as being interesting, and it seems to resonate with the majority of my listeners as well. I've had one review which was a scathing disappointment in me because I interrupt my guests and talk over them constantly. I listen to those reviews, which I go back and I listen to myself, and I don't think I do that. I mean, it's the same as you and I. If we were sitting in a room together, if you said something that really caught my attention, I'd be like, "Wait, what do you mean by that?" Go back to what you were just saying. And I think that's where a lot of the really good information comes from, and that you don't get that when you have a set of questions in front of you, because you'll ask the first question, they answer it, and then you're like, "Okay, time to move on to question number 2." When there probably should be more discussion about that answer, So, I named the show Uncomfortable because I knew that a segment of the population out there was going to be uncomfortable with some of the topics that I was talking about, because not everybody believes in the paranormal or spiritual stuff, or so hearing other people talk about it could make them uncomfortable. Then there were the aspects of the people that were going to be guests were possibly going to be uncomfortable being interviewed. It's not something you go through every day. But then, it never really dawned on me until episode 5 that I would end up being uncomfortable to some extent during an interview. And that happened for about 3 hours out of my life while I was interviewing Susan Moore, the Native American witch, in episode 5, which has, I owe her a big thanks, because that show that in particular episode has become very popular and has generated a lot of interest in Uncomfortable. That's how a lot of people found me. So
Right.
Well, that's the one Scott recommended to us first, and to be honest, I'm not a big podcast listener, and you're actually the first podcast I ever listened to. Period. So,
Oh, really?
Yeah, and that was the episode, and yeah, I found it quite interesting. But I see what you're saying. Well, you said backstage about, you're not going to necessarily disregard or disbelief what anybody says,
Right.
but and you're not going to be real skeptical. However, you didn't witness the stuff, but
From their perspective, yeah, right.
yeah, from their perspective. However, while you were there, you witnessed your own stuff. So
I did indeed.
yeah.
Yeah, I did. And, throughout my life, I guess this is pretty formulating to why I decided to do Uncomfortable. I've always had a huge interest in paranormal. I was utterly fascinated and obsessed with UFOs by the age of 5. And I've said this on a bunch of different shows. I'm 57 years old. So back when I was 5, we didn't have streaming services. We didn't have cell phones, smartphones in our pocket. I couldn't just at any moment decide, I want to find some pictures of UFOs. I want to read an article about UFOs. I didn't have that.
Right.
It was, and I still, to this day, I don't understand how I developed such a deep-seated desire to know about UFOs. And they've never seemed to be, like throughout my years as I've grown up, I've never gone through a period where I was like, I can't believe I believed in that shit before, and then, oh no, maybe I was right. Maybe they are real. I've just always been of the opinion that they are for real, and without a doubt have been, in our skies for hundreds and hundreds of years. There's depictions of them in old paintings and stuff, from biblical times, or
Right.
representing biblical times. And then it kind of just graduated into Bigfoot, Loch Ness Monster, Bermuda Triangle. Bermuda Triangle is it's still there for me. I think there's a really good explanation as far as why the boats have been lost. I saw a really good documentary on the release of certain kind of gases in that area that create a bunch of really tiny bubbles instead of big bubbles, and that they can disrupt the surface of the water and cause instability in floating craft and can cause them to sink. So that's kind of, I kind of accept that, but that doesn't explain the aircraft disappearances over the same area. So, but it's funny because, that used to be a really big topic, and now it just kind of seems to have died off. I don't know that there's anything new really being done about that area. So it's kind of tapered off, but Bigfoot is a hot button with me. It just everything about it, and I had, I lost my dad when I was 21. He was hit by a car. He decided to go to a bar, got drunk, way too drunk, and decided to walk home. So any listeners, please don't do that. Call an Uber, call your wife, call your kid, call somebody. Don't try to walk home drunk. But and it didn't happen right off the bat. It wasn't something that was immediate. It was, in fact, it was somewhere in the neighborhood of 8 to 12 months later, I started having some pretty profound experiences in the house that I lived in with him and my mom. And it finally kind of came to a head where there was no doubt left in my mind that who was interacting with me was my dad. So, it kind of answered a lot of questions for me, solidified some belief systems that I have, and just has kind of propelled me into wanting to hear other people's experiences and talk to them about what they've seen and heard. So I see somebody's asking a question. Do you think they're interdimensional or intergalactic beings? That's a lot of big words. And when you start thinking about the vastness of our universe and just our galaxy alone, I've always been under the impression that it's really pompous of us to think that we are the only thing that our creator has created.
Right.
So there's some things about the way UFOs tend to appear and disappear. There's videos and good videos of them kind of blinking out and then coming back. The one thing that I don't understand is, why are they lit? Why do they have a light source? It seems like with all of the technology that they have and their ability to move and redirect and travel at speeds that are incomprehensible. That was really bad English. Incomprehensible. Why light yourself up and make yourself noticed if you're trying to not be noticed? Right. So I don't know if that's a result of something that has to do with their propulsion, with the way that their craft interact with our atmosphere. I have no idea, but it does kind of tend to make you think, if they're traveling the distances that one would imagine that they are to get here, maybe they do have to transport themselves through dimensions, or when you say that stuff out loud, it just sounds insane,
Right.
But you're talking about another type of existence, another type of creature that's coming to our world. And I can't even begin to think of what that entails. Look at what we have to go through to put somebody up into space. And the weird thing for me is, like, Elon Musk and his SpaceX program, they can shoot stuff up into space pretty much on a weekly basis, and they're reusing their rockets, and they're doing all kinds of stuff. But NASA, they tend to spend an exorbitant amount of money on one rocket that's not reusable, that is good for one shot, and that's it. So there's a little bit of weirdness to me between those two. It's like, why aren't we all operating on the same wavelength as far as putting people up into space and potentially returning to the moon, or even going further and heading to Mars?
Well, one's heavily regulated by government, while the other's private.
Exactly. The same system that makes you pay $250,000 for a plastic toilet seat.
Yes.
In the military is the one that's funding NASA. So, and another thing I find that's really I literally started laughing out loud. I think it's probably in the neighborhood of 7 or 8 days ago now. NASA announced that they are putting together a committee of scientists to study the possibility of extraterrestrial intelligence. in space. And it's like, you guys have been in space for how many years now? And you're just now going to admit that you're having to kind of take a step back and maybe we should look at it and see if there's something else out there. Horseshit.
Publicly, that's what they're saying.
I think they're probably much more in the know than what any of us probably all assume but don't realize. Right. So, I mean, I'm sorry. As far as the question, do I think they're interdimensional? You know, I'll throw that question back at your listener, in that, you know, if you're spiritual, if you're religious at all, and, you know, no matter what your religious beliefs are, when you look at God and Christ and angels and all that stuff, does it make a lot of sense that those would be interdimensional beings? I'm not saying they're aliens. I'm not saying they're not aliens, but I'm not saying they are. But it tends to kind of lean towards them being interdimensional beings, you know? So
I would agree.
It's one of the theories that bounce around in my head pretty often. So,
well, and because we still haven't come across like a dead Bigfoot or one of these creatures,
right?
Other than probably in Area 51,
right?
So it leads me to believe that they are interdimensional. And with all the talk nowadays about the multiverse, I could see that quite possible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Laura, you got too many questions. I don't know why we never went back to the moon. What are you saying? I'm a NASA shill? I don't work for the government.
Or did we ever go to the moon?
You know, that's a good one too. You know, and here's my issue with conspiracy theories. Even though I love good conspiracy theories, personally, I love them, but I stay away from talking about them on my show for the most part, because you're never going to know if what you're saying is feeding into false information or not. You know, now when I watched the Zapruder film of JFK's assassination, I grew up in a family that we shot guns, and I'd been shooting since I was a wee little lad. Mm-hmm. And I've shot watermelons, I've shot water jugs, I've shot clay pigeons, I've shot animals, I've shot a number of different things. And I know that when you get hit with a projectile, you recoil in the direction that you're being pushed from that bullet. Mm-hmm. So the film does not make sense when they say he was shot from, you know, it doesn't make sense to me. You know, when I watch that film, I'm almost under the impression that a second shot came from the front seat of the car.
Yeah.
You know, so, but I wasn't there. I only have one view of it. And, you know, I think, didn't they say that the government's supposed to release additional information about JFK's assassination, but they're not going to do it until like 2032 or 2036, because that'll be the point where anybody involved with it will have passed on. There won't be any living direct people who had anything to do with the whole situation. So will we find out the truth then either? No, I doubt it. But
yeah, why not just release it if you're going to say, I'm going to release it on this day?
Yeah. You know, the interesting thing about, like you said, did we ever go to the moon? In my heart, in my gut, I feel that we went to the moon. The video that we have, I don't believe is real. I think, for the time that happened, with the technology that we had, I just don't think that good a quality of film could have come via a transmission from all the way from the moon to us to our TV sets and looked that good. There's too many things that could go wrong, in the transmission. The interesting thing is that Stanley Kubrick, who was the director of 2001: A Space Odyssey and a number of other very well-known movies, being one of which being The Shining. There's a lot of controversy over his involvement with filming fake moon landing footage. And you can do a deep dive into this, and it's got rabbit holes upon rabbit holes. But in the movie The Shining, so the story goes, supposedly, he was taking a lot of heat for supposedly being involved with this. His wife implored him that he was going to have to come clean about it. And he basically stated to her, I can't do that. There's no way I can possibly do that. So in the movie The Shining, he supposedly put a number of references to his involvement with producing those movies. And in one of the scenes, I believe he was a black actor, Scatman Crothers, was walking the family around, and they were in the kitchen. Mr. Holleran, I think, was his name in the movie. And he's showing the family the kitchen. And on the rack behind him were some very large containers of Tang, which, if anybody knows, Tang was made really popular because supposedly it was what the astronauts drank, right?
Right.
Mhm.
And then the little boy who had the finger that was red rum.
Mhm.
There's a scene in there where he's wearing a knitted sweater that has the Apollo rocket on it, and it says NASA on the thing. So there's a number of nods to space flight and astronauts and all that, and a lot of people read into that's his way of saying, yes, I was involved with manufacturing video that people would view as being real as far as the moon landings were concerned. And I don't discount that. I think that's probably very likely that those images were faked. But I don't think that means that we didn't go to the moon. I think we go to the moon, and I think that maybe there's a really good reason why we don't go back. And maybe that's because we weren't welcome there, or that we were not expecting to find what we found. So, but that's just me. So,
Right. So I believe we went to the moon. Just a episode Tony Merkel did with the guy who wrote the book. I'm not sure if it's called Moon Man, but I believe Tony named his episode Moon Man, and he, I believe he was someone behind the scenes who actually was in on like the video work from the government's point of view.
yeah. Well, I think there's been a number of whistleblowers who have worked for NASA, as far as people who have come forward and said that they were privy to retouching photographs of anomalous things that were found on the moon, whether they're taken by satellite or whether they were taken by the astronauts while they were there. Things that they don't want us to know were there. And I don't doubt that. I really don't. Whether it's an existing civilization now, whether that's the remnants of other other civilizations that had been there prior to us. You know, I mean, that could be as simple as, you know, Russia or China or, you know, another country, not necessarily extraterrestrial, but you would think that the world would have been aware of somebody else on Earth actually going to the moon prior to us. So I guess it kind of tends to lean a little more towards maybe extraterrestrial, but you know, it's just there's a lot, so many things. You know, when you start talking about that kind of stuff, you can go down so many rabbit holes, and you know what may feel really, really legitimate to me and make total sense to me doesn't necessarily mean it's gonna make sense to Scott or to Jason. You know, they may you may hear me and be like, "That's total horse shit. That doesn't make any sense at all." But to me, it does. So, you know, so much of those conspiracy theories are, I don't know. I love them, and I like hearing really good ones. You know, one of my favorite ones is all this stuff about CERN and the, you know, the different types of groups that they've had out front doing like rituals and stuff like that, and you know, that's some really interesting stuff. But
yeah,
you know, who knows what is it? You know, maybe for where it's at, that ritual that they did in front of there was just you know, something that's normal to their native culture, but it looks really weird to us. So I don't know. It's something that I decidedly I don't touch on conspiracy theories much on my show because it's just so open ended, and you know, there's no right or wrong. And I guess you could say that about paranormal as well. But, you know, I've had enough experiences with spiritual stuff. And, you know, I mean, I've seen lights in the sky. I've seen, you know, I've 100% without a doubt, you know, I think Jesus could come down and stand in front of me and tell me that there is no supernatural. And I'd have to say, you know, I respect you, but I disagree. You know, because of the things that I experienced when my dad passed. So I don't know.
So your podcast is a couple of years old, right? Like
February will mark February 14th will be the set for 2 full years. Yeah.
Okay. Leading up to it, like, had you done this type of work before, like interviewing people or investigating things, or you just finally got a chance to do what you're really interested in?
You know, when the kids were younger, 12, 13, 14, you know, Ghost Adventures was really popular on TV. Ghost Hunters had been on for a couple of years, and that was a show. You know, we would watch it as a family, and we were, you know, Friday nights or whatever night it came on, it was like, all right, everybody be quiet, you know, let's listen for the EVPs, you know, and we were all really into it. So, you know, there was a really old graveyard, you know, maybe 20-25 minutes away from the house. And the kids finally convinced me. They're like, so I took them and a couple of friends out, and you know, I had a digital camera in one hand, I had a camcorder in the other hand. My son was walking around with his voice memo thing open on his phone, asking, you know, questions, you know, like trying to get EVPs. And in that night of being there for like 90 minutes to 2 hours, I got a number of things on camera that, again, I had some things happen when my dad passed away. So I was convinced that this stuff is real. But I got a couple of photographs of things that can't be explained. You know, they should not have been there. My son got an EVP on his phone of a voice, and you can't really tell that it's a woman, but when I listen to it, I get the impression that it's like an older woman, and it basically just says, "You don't belong here." And it wasn't like, "You don't belong here." It wasn't anything threatening or, you know, ominous or anything like that. It was more like it was delivered in a way that it just made you feel like, hey, this is not your place. This is where we were laid to rest. You shouldn't be here. And that's the impression that I got from it. So, but I got a photograph of a mist by some broken headstones that, and I can send these to you if you want to add these in at a later time or something. This mist, I learned from watching these shows, you take 3 pictures in a row. Every time you take a picture, you take 1, 2, 3. And the first picture came out perfectly clear, nothing in it. Second picture, there was something. Third picture, nothing in it. And this mist, it literally has the shape of like an adult figure kind of standing sideways to me, to the camera, bent over at the waist. And it seems to be like leaning over somebody that's in a chair. And, the way cameras work, with autofocus, in the first picture, the things that should have been in focus, which were closer, were in focus, and the things further behind were kind of out of focus. Excuse me. The mist that I caught in the second picture, it was the only thing in focus. Everything else, even the gravestones, were slightly out of focus. So whatever the camera picked up, it was in front of the gravestones, and it made the camera focus on it. And it's so weird that it doesn't even look like normal pixels in a digital camera, because at that time, I think the camera was like maybe 9 or 10 megapixel, which was pretty good for the time. Now you got better than that on your iPhone, but even when you blow it up like on a computer screen, it takes on a weird shape. It doesn't look like normal pixelation. So it was really strange. And then I took a picture of the wood line around the outside edge of it, the graveyard. It was a rather small, maybe 2/3 of an acre, maybe 3/4 of an acre, and then it had woods around the outside edges of it. And I just took pictures through the wood line, and I was loading them onto the computer. My son walked in the room at the time, and he's like, "Hey, is that a face?" And I said, "What? Where?" And he's like, "Right there." And I was like, "I still don't see it." And he goes, flip the picture upside down. And I flipped the picture upside down, and sure enough, in the trees is this white face that is very reminiscent of a skull, kind of maybe more like you guys familiar with Motley Crue from back in the 80s?
Yeah.
Remember the Theater of Pain album, how
Yeah.
they had the theater masks hanging? More reminiscent of like a theater mask, but it had a head at the top of the head as well. And I was like, Jesus Christ, kid, how did you see that? Especially upside down and from like on the other side of the bedroom. And he's like, I don't know. I just picked it out immediately. And sure enough, it's like, holy shit, that's a face. And then my daughter, she, at one point, it was getting close to the time we were wrapping up. She said, Hey dad, come over here. It's really cold over here. And I was like, yeah, sure. It's cold over there, and it was a summer night. We were in shorts and t-shirts, and she had walked between 2 really large, like oak trees or something. And on the other side of those 2 trees was a monument. And it kind of looked like the Washington Monument, a real tall pillar, had 4 sides, and the top of it was kind of ground down to a pyramid shape. And it was highly reflective. It was, polished. Like I imagine what granite is probably what they make most stones out of in cemeteries. And I walked between those trees to go back where she was, and I was like, holy shit, it is colder back here. And that was weird, It was noticeably cooler when I passed through those trees. And again, I had the camera in one hand, and I had the camcorder in the other, and I had the camcorder going. And one of the other kids was talking, and I was facing the monument. I had the camera going, and as I looked away from the kid that was talking to me and looked towards the monument, all of a sudden, at the very top of it, kind of like where the pyramid shape is, this, a lot of people talk about orbs and they take pictures and there's dust particles and they kind of light up because of the flash or there's a bug or something. This was a legitimate orb. This manifested out of nowhere. It was a little bit smaller than a golf ball, maybe. It produced light because you could see it in the video. You could see it reflecting on the polished finish of the monument, and it was white, but it had a bluish hue to it. You drive, like nowadays, a lot of people have those weird LED headlights that have, it still shines a white light, but it's got a bluish tint to it. It was kind of like that. It wasn't super bright. It wasn't like it illuminated everything around it. It did produce some light because you could see it reflect in the polished part of the stone. And when it popped up, I mean, 2 seconds maybe, and it was there, and then it kind of did this like curly Q figure 8 wiggle, and then it just went and it was gone. It wasn't like you could follow it. It didn't leave a trail. It was just, it darted around and then it was boom, it was gone. And my daughter, she was looking at the same place I was, and at like 12 or 13 years old, on camera, I got her going, holy shit, holy shit, holy shit, holy shit. Did you see that? So, yeah, it was, and again, after doing that, I've done a couple of ghost investigations, and I've gotten some EVPs and some other stuff, K2 meter readings, pretty recently, maybe like 3 months ago. I got invited to the Kalamazoo area at a friend who was renting a cottage on Gull Lake for the whole summer. And they were saying that they were having all kinds of weird things going on in the cottage, and asked if me and my son wanted to come up and spend the night and see if we could find anything. So we did, and we kind of went at it pretty hard. We started investigating at about 1 o'clock in the morning, and we didn't get done till pretty damn close to 5 a.m. I was actually running my podcast, recording everything at the time. So I've got like six different microphones with about 4.5 to 5 hours of audio on each one of them. And I was really hoping to have it done and be able to release it for a Halloween show. I had no idea how slow editing and going through, because each one of us at some point had spent a good deal of time like asking questions and recording EVPs. And, I've barely even gotten through just my son's, and I've already got, like 5 or 6 EVPs. Wow. I haven't even gotten to the other channels. It's just monumental. I'd need a crew of,
right,
like 6 people going through this stuff to get it done. Eventually it'll see the light of day. And I keep talking about it, and people are probably like, yeah, you keep talking about it, but we never see anything. And it's like, it's so much to go through. And, when you get to a point where you hear something or you see something in the audio program as you're running it through your computer, if you see something, then you have to highlight that spot and then try to amplify it, but then continue to put noise reduction into it as well, so that you get a good clean sound, and then, listen to it 40, 50 times so you can try to figure out what it's saying. But we had some EVPs that they seemed to be responding to the questions that we were asking. And it was crazy. I mean, again, just confirmation that the stuff is real.
Oh yeah, definitely. Jason, you want to tell your little story, and we have a picture that goes along with it?
Yeah. The bad thing is I wasn't there. This was in Gettysburg, and if I remember correctly, my wife this is what my wife was there with her kids, but they were in the basement of an old orphanage, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
And my youngest daughter, who is 16 now, she was just having a fit. She was crying, was scared. You know, it was supposed to be like a haunted thing.
Right.
She just something wasn't right. And my mother-in-law was holding her. She sat down and was holding her, and my wife had turned around and snapped this picture. And you can definitely see my daughter, and then to her left, it is to the left of my daughter in the green shirt is my mother-in-law. But if you look right above my daughter's head where the arrow is,
Yeah.
that image come through on my wife's picture.
That's
Can
kind
you
of creepy.
zoom that, Scott?
That's kind of creepy.
Huh?
Are you able to zoom in on that?
I don't think so.
No. Okay.
I wish I could here.
Yeah, well, and then I zoomed in on that because she was like way down the hall when she turned around and took this picture. And when she sent it to me, like this was probably 8-9 years ago, I'm guessing. And but you know, I was home working, they were away, and she sent me that picture. I said, "Who's that standing behind them?" And my wife says, "Nobody." I said, "Well, there's somebody back there." She goes, "Yeah, that's why I sent you the picture."
That's what she saw it.
Yeah, that was pretty freaky. But then my wife told me the other day. See, I was trying to get her to come on the show tonight to tell this story, but she asked me, she goes, "Do you have that other picture?" I said, "What other picture?" That there was a battlefield, you know, Gettysburg, you know, and there was nothing in the field, but plain as day in the photograph, you could see a horse in the field.
Oh wow.
And she didn't send me that picture, so I didn't have it. But yeah, so yeah, freaky stuff. So yeah, I mean, I'm not 100% believer, but there's some weird shit out there. That's for sure.
Well, you know, I think it is one of those polarizing things that you can entertain the thought of it. You can think that it's plausible. You can be, yeah, that's logical. I mean, why not? But you know, to firmly believe, it usually takes having an experience for yourself that and some people, and this is the funny thing, a lot of my guests that are more on the spiritual end of things, whether they're psychics or mediums or both, or light workers and people that deal with just trying to put good energy out and do protective things for themselves to keep negative entities from interacting or causing harm to them. It's one of those things that it just, unless you have it happen to you, you don't have anything to base it on. You can say, oh yeah, I saw something on TV that was like that. Well, that's not the same. I mean, until you have something happen to you or in the present, while you're in the presence of it, it definitely becomes something that, and I guess that's what the great thing about doing this show is. I've got a belief system already in place as far as the things that I've experienced in my life and the things that make sense to me that are possible in this life. But then you hear other people's experiences, and even though it doesn't necessarily change my beliefs, it does give me an opportunity to now look back at some things from a different perspective, because I've interviewed somebody who had a different take on it. It doesn't, like I said, it doesn't necessarily change. Sometimes it does. Doesn't change my belief system, but sometimes it does, where things tend to make a little bit more sense. And that's the great thing about doing these interviews and sitting and talking with these people at length. You know, when I started doing the show, I had a couple of buddies of mine like, you got to stay between, half hour and 45 minutes, or people are gonna just not gonna listen because it's too long. Nobody wants to invest that kind of time. Well, Scott, you've been through a lot of my shows.
Mm-hmm.
I don't put any constraints on time. I've had shows that go 2.5 hours. I've had shows that I've had to split up into two-parters because they've run 3 or 3.5 hours. As long as the conversation is good and the topics that we're talking about are relevant to, the genre that, my show is in, we keep going. It's just, until we get too tired that we can't talk anymore. And then there's times where we end a conversation and, once I hit stop on the recording, the first thing out of the guest's mouth is, we got to do this again. I want to do another one with you. But you don't want to oversaturate your audience with the same guest too much all at once. So, that's when you start scheduling somebody, 6 or 8 months out, so that they have some time to, digest what they've heard and then come back to it. So,
well, and you had, what's her name? Shaitan Noir.
Shaitan Noir.
Yeah, you've had her on several times, but what's interesting about her is there's a lot of topics you could go down.
She's a great guest. She's very knowledgeable. Just the nicest lady I ever want to meet. I actually hosted my first Bigfoot conference back in September here locally. There's a small town just maybe 35, 40 minutes, about 40 minutes north of me in Dowagiac, Michigan. And it's the Sister Lakes region. And back in 1964, the Sister Lakes monster gained national attention. And it was a summer worth of sightings during, in this small, sleepy little rental lake cottage community. There's it's either 6 lakes. I think it's 11 lakes in a 6-mile radius. And they're all small little small town lakes. But the Sister Lakes monster, all of the witness accounts point to something 7 to 8 feet tall, hairy, stunk like hell, sometimes wet. Looked like it had a couple of the accounts said it looked like it had like seaweed or something on it. So there were indications that it may have been, traveling through the water in some of the lakes there. But it was very much Bigfoot related. So I ended up hosting Bigfoot and Brews at a local brewery there back in September. And it turned out fantastic, far exceeded my expectations. But Shaitan, she was integral in helping me put together that show, because that's what she does for a living. She a lot of times she's helps to coordinate events. Other times she's a speaker at events, and she's a great lady to have on. I would highly encourage you, if you guys have any desire to talk about this kind of stuff on another episode, get a hold of her, because you can pull anything you want and she'll have a wealth of knowledge on it.
Oh yeah, definitely. We had a couple of guys throughout the stream who've been asking where you're actually located.
Okay, so a lot of people. I lived in Michigan for several years. I still coach football to some extent in Michigan, but I am and literally when I was a younger man and I had a better arm on me, I could throw a baseball from my front yard to hit the state line. So I am actually just inside the state line of Indiana, in South Bend, home of the Fighting Irish. I live about 7 miles north of the campus of Notre Dame. So, that kind of pinpoints it. So any psychos out there who want to try to kill me.
I know we have a lot of guys in the community who are on both sides of that line,
Yeah,
that state line. So.
yeah. But yeah, I lived on the other side of the line for 12, 13 years, 14 years, something like that. Michigan has always been my home away from home. Even as a kid, my parents always had a boat up in South Haven, Michigan. So I spent numerous summers, on the beaches there in Michigan. It seems like whenever I leave my neighborhood, I can either turn left and go into South Bend, which is where I work, and I can turn right and go do all the fun stuff that I want to do in Michigan. So I tend to turn right a lot. Yeah. So.
Now, have you ever witnessed a Bigfoot?
I have not seen one. No. I will say that at the time that I experienced what I did, I knew of Bigfoot. It was something that I was extremely interested in, but more on a superficial level, more like, so at that time, the deepest that I was really going with Bigfoot stuff was watching Finding Bigfoot. Once in a while finding a documentary about it, but it was pretty superficial. Really interested in it, but I didn't do a whole lot of deep dives on it. I hunted some property in Niles, Michigan that was less than a mile away from my house. It was in a neighborhood area. It was fairly spread out, but there were neighbor houses and stuff. Long story short, I was hunting this piece of property, and I had been fascinated with the piece of property that was beside it, but I did not have permission to hunt it. And the one night I was out there, it was getting about a half hour before hunting time was done. Hadn't seen anything. The trail was worn. It was a good trail. I had gotten deer on that property before. But for some reason, it just got the better of me, and I set my shotgun down behind this tree fall that I was at. I was sitting on a bucket, was about it. And I walked onto this other property, and it was just a super interesting piece of property because there was like regular forest, you had oak trees and maples and all kinds of other stuff. And then you had a lot of low-lying brush. And then on the outskirts of that, there was a pretty good swath of pine trees, which housed, the one morning I was sitting out there when the turkeys came out of the roost, and there were 57 turkeys that landed in front of me. So it was, for this small piece of property, had a lot of turkey on it. And then there's a game trail, like I said, that was pretty well worn through there. It was highly traveled. And then on the other side of that trail, there was a couple more pine trees. And then there was like a wetlands. There was a stream that ran through there. It was really marshy, a lot of tall grass. And you could see where the grass was all matted down, where the deer would bed at night, and that's basically why I hunted that right next to that piece of property, because at some point, with all the activity of the deer that were there, it only made sense that at some point they would come through there while I was there, which they didn't very often. But so I walked onto this property, and I probably got a good 50, 60 yards into it. And I got to the point where I could see off in the distance, I could see the corner of the house that was on that property. And I was like, oh, okay, too far. I don't want to piss anybody off. I wasn't hunting the property, and I had no right to be on there. I just wanted to check it out and see why it was so interesting. I turned around and I started walking back, and I wasn't walking fast. I was walking slow. I was still trying to take everything in. And behind me, I start hearing footsteps crunching in the leaf litter. And immediately through my brain went, oh shit, it's the landowner, and he's gonna ream me
or shoot you
or shoot me. I purposely had my hands down at my sides so he could see that I wasn't carrying a weapon. And I stopped. And when I stopped, it took 1 or 2 steps and it stopped. At this point, he stopped. And I just stood there and I waited for it because I was in the wrong. If he wanted to light me up, I was willing to take it. You give me an ass chewing because you're right. I shouldn't be here. But he didn't say anything. And I didn't hear the footsteps anymore. So I was like, all right. So I started walking again. And 1 or 2 steps into me starting up again, I start hearing footsteps behind me again. And I stopped. And it took 1 or 2 steps and it stopped. On about the 3rd time that I did that, I got goosebumps all over me and my brain just exploded because I was like, oh my God, this is a huge 12-point buck. Nobody's ever seen a deer this big. For whatever reason, it's following me back to my hunting spot. And I'm thinking, it's a possibility I could have some deer estrus on my clothes. Maybe it smells it. Maybe it's confused. And I'm like, so now I'm formulating. It's like, okay, I've only got so far to go. And when I get there, I'm just going to grab my shotgun, pull it up in front of me so it doesn't look like there's a lot of movement, slowly work it up to where I can get my hand on the trigger. And then I'm going to turn at the waist and he's going to be standing right there behind me, 10, 20 feet at max away from me. And at that point, even though I don't have a side shot, that shotgun's going to go through that breastbone, right? So I continued to walk. It continued to follow me. I got to where I could reach my shotgun and I did exactly that. I pulled it over to me and I started moving it up my chest so I could get my hand on the forearm, on the foregrip, and my finger in the trigger. And I didn't even take a step. I kept my feet facing away from it and I turned at the waist really quick. Well, as soon as I twitched to make that turn, I heard this massive exhale of air. Just this. It almost reminded me, like when you hear a horse go, without the lip flapping and all that. It was just that, whatever it was, it had really big lungs, and it let out just this massive exhale of air like it was pissed. And I heard thump, thump. And that was it. And I had turned, and there was nothing there. And I took 2 steps back onto the property I wasn't supposed to be on because I knew I was going to see this giant ass white tail just bounding through the woods, going away from me. And there was nothing. There wasn't a twig moving like it had been bumped into. There wasn't a leaf that was, floating back down to the ground. There was absolutely nothing there. And I can remember just standing there going, oh my God. How can I not see it? And what was going through my mind was, you can be sitting, at least I can. I wasn't a well-seasoned hunter. I'd been doing it for a few years, but you can sit there and be looking at a cornfield for hours, and then all of a sudden there's like 3 deer standing there, and you're like, holy shit, where'd they come from? I didn't even see it come out because that natural camouflage that they have is so deceptive. For something that is light tans and white, you wouldn't think blends in that well, but it's remarkable. So I'm thinking that, I'm not picking it up. So, it was minutes away from the end of hunting for the day. I grabbed my bucket, I unloaded my shotgun, and I exited the woods, and I started walking down the tree line back to where my car was parked. And I'll be damned if I don't hear the footsteps inside the tree line again. And I've got, my son suffers from this too. We've got a flashlight fetish. I can't see a flashlight that looks really cool and not buy it. It's ridiculous. So I've always got a really good flashlight. And I pulled the flashlight out of my holster on the side, and I clicked it on, and I start shining it into the tree line, and I could hear the footsteps. And I swear, man, it only sounded like they were 10 or 15 feet inside the wood line. It wasn't that far away from me. And, in my head, I'm still thinking it's this deer. But now I'm thinking it's broadside to me because it's walking parallel with me out of the, as I'm walking out of the field. And I'm like, holy shit, I'm going to see this thing and I'm going to be able to blast it, right from the side. Nothing. And, the weird thing was, and I think about this now, I don't know that it really registered with me then. But again, I didn't see any of the low-lying brush. I didn't see any twigs moving. I didn't see any brush moving back and forth. It was just, it was weird. And it walked back with me probably 2/3 of the way back to my car. And oh, Laura. You're getting a little loosey-goosey there, aren't you? And again, at this time, really, Bigfoot's not even entering my mind. It was just something weird, I don't even know that I was thinking about it as being anything, supernatural or woo-ish or anything like that. It was just, how could I not see this thing walking in the it was a normal woods. It wasn't like super, super dense or anything. And, but once I really started doing a deep dive into Bigfoot and listening to a lot of different encounters and reading stories of people's accounts and stuff like that, I started coming across a lot of people having a very similar experience being around these things. Some of them end up seeing them. Some of them, like myself, don't. But that's when I kind of started putting 2 and 2 together. And it's like, okay, but Southwest Michigan, 2,000 yards away from a high school in a neighborhood just doesn't make sense, right? Well, my episode 2 and 3 is a gentleman that I worked with. And he had one walk out in front of him, not too far from there. And if you listen to that episode, I did that interview at their house. I sat there at their dining room table with him and his 2 daughters. His wife was there, their son was there, and one of the daughter's boyfriends were there. And we talked for 2.5 hours. And once we were done recording, I had a conversation with the wife, and she talked to me about the ramifications of them seeing this thing, and having to get the one girl into a therapist, basically, to talk about what she'd seen. There was not an ounce of bullshit that was coming out of anybody's mouth at that table. I would stand in front of a loaded gun for any one of those people and swear up and down that what's coming out of their mouth is the God's honest truth as they know it. So their experience took place at a hunting property that was about 35 miles away from their house. But then they had an experience. 2 of the daughters had the experiences on the property at their home. And that home was less than 5 minutes away from where I was hunting. So once I aired that program, once both of those episodes aired, I started to receive a number of emails, I think 6 altogether, of people who had actually lived within 30-mile radius of where I'm talking about, who all had different experiences or had known somebody who had experiences in those same areas. So confirmation, I suppose you could say, well, they're just bullshit. You know, they're just trying to get, you know, 2 minutes of fame or whatever. But I can tell you this, none of the people that emailed me about that were interested in being on the show. They were just like, holy crap, I grew up, you know, 10 minutes from there, and I can remember my brother and my dad coming back talking about, you know, hearing these weird howls and screams in the middle of the woods, and you know, it just a lot of confirmation. So
Yeah.
I don't know, you know, I don't know what I would do if I saw one. I would probably wish like hell that I was wearing brown pants, you know, and I would certainly hope that they are the tree hugging, Mother Nature loving, big woolly,
Like Harry and the Hendersons.
Yeah, I would really, really hope that they are that, rather than some of the experiences you hear like on Sasquatch Chronicles or something like that. I actually, Laura, the woman that keeps popping up in here, I believe it was last night, she messaged me that her hairdresser out on the West Coast, that woman's grandfather claims to have shot one, and they have gotten message to him that I'm interested in talking to him.
Oh,
So that would be interesting. I would love to talk to that guy. I actually had an episode, I think it was entitled Attacked in East Texas. It was a gentleman who was a arms dealer. He had a gun shop, and he was traveling early morning, traveling to a swap meet or like a gun show, and he had pulled off at a boat landing access along a river in East Texas. And I don't know if you know much about Bigfoot stuff in Texas. East Texas is pretty much a hot spot, regarded as a hot spot. He pulled in and he had to relieve himself. So he got out of his truck. He walked over to the edge of the wood line and did his business. And an arm reached out from underneath the brush, hooked the back of his leg at the ankle, and drug him for what he says was about 100 yards into the woods. It dropped him, turned around and faced him. And when it did, he on his right leg, he had a holstered sawed-off shotgun. He pulled that out and he placed it between the belly button and just above his parts and pulled the trigger. He said it dropped him to his knees. He said he steadied himself by lifting up his one arm and holding on to a tree limb above him, but he never fell. He was in shock. He said he had a look of anger at first, shock, and then he said it was almost a look of betrayal. And he said at that point where he noticed that the thing to be like kind of bewildered and stunned, he pushed off with his legs, got a little bit of distance between him and it, got up, ran out of the woods, got back to his truck, removed another weapon from under the seat of his truck. I think was a 357, either that or a 44, and shot multiple times in the direction that he had left the woods, but didn't see it again. So, you know, those type of experiences I have no desire to be a part of for obvious reasons. Right. And I think there's, you know, if you get into this enough and you start hearing about them, there is, and I think with anything, you know, they talk about, you know, estimated populations of these things being somewhere in the neighborhood of up to maybe 300 per state, which doesn't sound like a lot. But my guess is they're fairly concentrated. So that probably increases the chances of being able to see these things. But like people, you've got good people, you got bad people, you got people who are probably good-hearted, but they're, they deal with some shady stuff now and again, or they do things that they probably shouldn't have. So it would only make sense that if these things are related to us in some extent, that they probably behave similar to us, at least in their social structure. And, there's a lot of talk about the more aggressive encounters always seem to be like there being one, like it was a rogue male. So that leads a lot of people to believe that, at some point, to ensure that the gene pool does not get pissed out and oversaturated or compromised, that young males, once we get to the age of being able to breed, are kind of pushed out of a family unit or a tribe or, whatever people consider a group of them, a pod or whatever they are, and that they need to go and they move on till they find another group and then find themselves a female and start their own. Even if of all the accounts of all the people that claim to have seen one or had an experience or witnessed one, if only one person is telling the truth, that's all it takes is just one person being honest, and I don't think, sure, there's some stories that I've read or heard relayed on other shows that are just like, oh, come on, man. There's, you're pushing it. You lost me now.
Have you ever thought that way when you were interviewing someone? You don't have to name names or episodes, but like, have you ever thought that? Like,
I've been really fortunate. There's been maybe 2 episodes that I've done where one in particular, I think the person that I talked to was inserting themselves into something that was happening to somebody else. Okay, I think somebody close to them was experiencing some really weird stuff, and they took it as an opportunity to insert themselves as being the primary person in the story.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the information that was relayed was factual, but I think it was done in a disingenuous way where this person was trying to take credit for being the person that it was happening to.
Yeah.
There was one person that had an extremely crazy story about Sasquatch. And I'll leave it up to people who are interested in listening to the show to decide what show that is. But I really got the impression that there's a specific thing that gets mentioned, not Bigfoot related, throughout the episode a couple of times, and it was mentioned during a phone call previously, and it was mentioned in a phone call afterwards. And I think that trauma produced a screen for this person, and that was the way that they were able to deal with the trauma that they experienced. I think that they initially had a legitimate experience with a Bigfoot, but I think the rest of the crazy part of the story was something that was related to covering up some darker things that had happened to that kid when they were younger.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not a psychiatrist. I'm not a psychologist. That's just my feeling, I could be completely wrong, but I don't think I am.
That's my field, actually.
Is it really?
Psychiatry, yeah.
So if you're interested, after we go off air, I'll tell you what episode
Okay.
I'm talking about.
Yeah.
And if
Yeah.
you'd listen to it, I'd be really interested to know what you have to say as well.
Yeah, sure thing. That'll
But
be good.
I've been really fortunate. I've had some bizarre stories, but everybody that I've talked to, and here's the thing I always fall back on. My gut instinct has served me really well throughout my life. I spent time your guys are something else, man.
Oh yeah, he actually lives in Hawaii.
Does he really? That's funny because I am not aware of any Sasquatch sightings in Hawaii.
And
I may be wrong.
There are a lot of mountains and a lot of big vegetation there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I used to live in Hawaii, and I'm thinking back, like there may have been. I wasn't that familiar with the Hawaiian culture though, so it would be in like their own Hawaiian culture,
right?
I think as far as like history goes, but modern times I'd never heard about it when I was there.
What was I going to say before that comment kind of took me out of my my thought process there?
But yeah, and I was wondering too, like, have you heard of Bigfoot in other countries like India or the
vast majority of the world has reports of them. The Yeti in Nepal, you've got the Yeri in China, you've got Sasquatch in Ontario and British Columbia and all that. It's Bigfoot by its name here in the States. Australia has the Yowie. Russia has the Almes, I think it is, or I'm going to get a rash of shit for not remembering the name of the one in Russia. But they're all over the place. And I don't know what to make of that. It just seems, again, like UFOs. There was never a time in my life where I didn't honestly believe that they were real. And like the first time that I could remember seeing I saw pictures of the Patterson-Gimlin film in books and stuff in grade school. But I don't think it was until, I think it aired in 1977 with Leonard Nimoy when he was doing In Search Of, where they actually showed the entire Patterson-Gimlin film, 57 seconds or 60 seconds of film footage that they got of this hairy beast walking across Bluff Creek, this dried creek bed. And, at the time, 95% of that film is really jiggly and it's, not very clear. And, even when I saw that, I was like, man, that looks really natural to me, that there's something organic about the way it moves. And, I was a huge fan of the Planet of the Apes movies when I was a kid. The original Planet of the Apes, I thought were amazing. And the special effects were fantastic for its time. I think the first one came out in 67 or 68. And I was just bored by those movies. I just couldn't get enough of them. But they looked like people in makeup, and this thing, to me, it didn't. And now as the years have progressed, I read an article fairly recently, and that film, the Patterson-Gimlin film, is the second most analyzed film in history. The first is still the Zapruder film for the assassination of Kennedy. But the technology now, within a year, this past year, and I think it aired on a show called The Proof Is Out There. Dr. Jeff Meldrum, who is an anthropologist with Idaho State University, he's the one who's studied the foot morphology of these track casts that are being found in the ground, where people pour the plaster into it.
Mhm.
He's very adept at finding fake ones, and he's found some that actually have dermal ridges in it, where like the prints of your fingers, like on the bottom of your toes, are actually in the casts. So he's very knowledgeable. And then there were two other gentlemen, but the third gentleman, he took the film and took as many different copies of it in different resolutions and from different sources, and ran it through an AI system, an artificial intelligence, that would clear up, replace missing pieces in the footage, and then put it all together in a stabilized version. And it is the clearest and most stabilized version of the film that has ever been. And when you watch that now, you can actually see her toes curl up as she's going to take her step across the creek bed there. You can see tiny little inconsistencies, like in the muscle of the leg that would be facing the camera, her right leg. You can see what looks like a physical injury, like it would have been a herniated muscle or something, because there's like a lump in her thigh that kind of flexes and then releases as she's taking steps. You can clearly see that she has massive breasts underneath the hair. Now, if you were gonna fake it, if you were gonna create a costume and film a Bigfoot, why would you have somebody make a female? I think anybody that you would talk to, as far as, there's still people in this world that think that Bigfoot is one sole, singular, solitary creature. Bigfoot has made its way like across the United States, back and forth, for hundreds of years, and it's the only one, which is not the case. But
Right.
Why would you put in the effort and all that, and have somebody decide, hey, let's make this costume a woman and give her really big boobs and make sure they jiggle like crazy underneath that hair when she walks? It just doesn't make a lot of sense why you would choose a female form to do that. But in this video, it is extremely clear that it is a female.
Yeah.
And years ago, people argued that there's a line that goes like down the back and through the butt cheek area that was obviously the zipper to the suit. Well, in this new version, with having run it through the AI and the clarification process that they've done on it, you can actually see that that's like, it's the crack of her booty, and it's just the way the hair is parted and matted in that area, and through the lower back, that's the way that the hair grain, or the direction that the hairs are growing. So it has withstood a lot of scrutiny and a lot of controversy, and it's still hands down is some of the best evidence that we have to date of a good actual representation of that. So
Right, and it doesn't even look like there's anywhere where you can say that it's a fake costume. There's no seams, you can't see where the head would be removed to take off.
right, yeah.
Um,
I agree, man. You're preaching to the choir here. There's nothing about it that does not seem organic to me. It all seems very organic.
Yeah.
And if you were in a costume like that, especially when you look at the brow ridge and the protrusion of the face, if there was a human face inside of that, you have to think about the amount of mask that would be in front of your face. Now, you guys started the show off by wearing masks, right?
Yeah.
So, imagine trying to walk through a difficult terrain with that mask on, and not being able to just look down casually with your eyes to make sure that you're not going to trip over something or step over something. You have to tilt your head down. and make sure that your feet are going where they need to go, right? So you're not going to. And when you watch that film, she's not doing that. Her eyes are like straight ahead, looking at the forest, the tree line, where she eventually exits into the tree line. It doesn't look like somebody that's stumbling around in a oversized suit to me.
Yeah, I've watched many documentaries on it, and I could never find anything that looked like it wasn't organic.
You know, and my son would make the argument. It's like when he watches it, he's like, "Yeah, it really looks, it looks real, but you just can't see, the foot bend." That was like a sticking point for him. You couldn't see the foot bend. And when they came out with this newest version with the AI and everything, you can actually see her toes curl up as she's getting ready to take her step forward. And that, to me, that's like, holy crap. You're not going to create a costume where your foot's going to have the flexibility to be able to make the costume bend like that. Did Eric mention they think she had a baby on her? So there seems to be, like, on the side of her that is away from the camera, they mention that there's something that looks like she's carrying something, whether it's some kind of a fashioned bag or purse or something, on the side of her. Something. I know what she's getting at. There is some conspiracy that a Bigfoot researcher has put out there, and I believe his name is M.K. Davis. He's got a lot of really good information, but his contention is that the gentlemen that were out there with Patterson and Gimlin had hunting dogs, and that there was an ambush of some kind that took place, and that some of these creatures were killed. And the reason that she is walking away is because she was trying to lead them away from a toddler or an infant Bigfoot. This guy MK, he makes a pretty good argument. There's some extra footage that looks like there's some bloody prints in the sand, but again, that stuff was filmed in 1967 with a handheld camera. It's really unclear. I don't know, the processing of the film and everything. It's not like the HD stuff that we have now. So, he may be reading stuff into it. He claims to have some information from somebody who would know that there were some creatures that were killed, and but I don't know how true that is. So it's another interesting rabbit hole to go down. But you said something earlier about not having a body. I don't think that's entirely accurate. And I'm not, it's not a government conspiracy or anything like that. I do think, oh, hey, Wendy. There's no way they could have made a Bigfoot costume that would look like that. I agree with you 100%. Yeah. I love that woman. She is right on the mark right there. She kind of took me out of my thought again. Again, I go back to, there's so many people that have had eyewitness sightings, and so many people who have had experiences. There's people out there that said that they've lived with these things for years and years on their property. There's some crazy ass people out there. There are some crazy people, and there's some people that are crazy like a fox, because they end up finding, they find a group of people that really enjoy what they have to say, and it may not necessarily be true, and they take advantage of that. and they get a cult following, and it becomes an issue when you try to have a serious discussion about the topic, because there's a lot of really good information out there, and if it's something that you're interested in, I have spent hours trudging through stuff that I'll just throw right out the window because it's like, this is horseshit. This does not make sense to me. My gut tells me no, I'm not going to pay attention to it. And there's a lot of that stuff out there. Mountain Monsters, that TV show with the hillbillies that are, hunting for these things. And, every week they got them in their grasp, but oh, damn, we missed it. Completely produced, completely disingenuous, but it does absolutely nothing to help further the serious inquiry into these things' existence. And that's disappointing because, much like the UFO topic, much like spirituality, the existence of God, the existence of angels, the existence of ghosts, spiritual interactions, stuff like that. When you start watching these TV shows that are so overly produced, and if you've got producers who are saying, okay, we got to really ramp this one up because we want people to come back after the commercials. We want them to come back next week and watch the next episode. So everything we're going to do this year is going to be a portal to hell. And, everything that we deal with is demonic, and everybody's going to get, marks on them, and we're going to get scratched and all that shit. And, I've talked to a lot of people who have been investigating haunted locations for years, 15 years, 20 years, 30 years. And the vast majority of them will tell you that very, very, very rarely are they running into anything that appears to be that negative of an entity. I'm not saying that they don't exist, because they do. But I don't think they're creeping around in a haunted house messing with people who don't matter, I just don't think that happens that often. Now, I do think there are bad entities that can influence and do influence people, how they think, how they act, how they behave. I think that's a very real thing, and unfortunately, and this is kind of a progression of how my show has gone recently in the last few months. I have, there for a while, everything I was getting was Bigfoot. And then all of a sudden there was a change, and everything started to become, people who consider themselves light workers or witches or, people on the end of things that are spiritual nature, like Archbishop Christina Rake from the old Catholic Church in Chicago, Illinois, who wrote a book literally entitled God and the Paranormal. I grew up Catholic and was raised Catholic. And when I was in Catholic Church, you didn't talk about that shit. That wasn't something that you weren't allowed to. When you listen to her and her information that she pulls from the Bible, the Bible was written for people to continue to have a relationship with those who have passed on, to continue to remember them and communicate with them and stuff like that. So, there's so many different variations of people's thought processes on this stuff that I think it becomes imperative that people begin to deal with this on a personal level, and instead of being preached to or told what to think when it comes to spirituality or your relationship with whatever you consider to be our creator, I think the more personal you get and the further away you get from a man, and when I say man, I mean, us, that beard oil work on chairs
No.
Look, I think Laura's hitting the bottle. I just, personally for me, the further I've gotten into this, my spirituality and my relationship with the Creator, and I always refer to it as that because I don't want to single out or other people believe in what they believe, and I think that's great as long as you have belief in something good and great and larger than yourself. I think that's a good thing. But I always refer to it as a Creator, and I know what I mean when I say that, but I don't need to impose my views on anybody else. I think when you start getting a more personal relationship with that, things begin to start coming a little clearer. And when you open yourself up to the possibility of these other things, these other aspects actually existing, you'll find that you've had an experience that you just brushed off because it was like, oh, that was weird, but that couldn't be, and you brush it off. Well, maybe it was, and you're kind of closed off to it. I think a lot of people probably grew up at a point and their parents told you, all right, knock it off with the imaginary friends, knock it off with, all the fantasy stuff going on in your head. Well, when we were young like that, I think we were way more open to the reality of this stuff being around us. And for whatever reason, I think younger children, the veil, the things that are on the other side of the veil, I think it's a lot clearer to us. I think we can see it a lot easier when we're younger. And maybe that's because we haven't had people preaching to us constantly, right, and, telling us that no, those things don't exist and that's silly, put it away, it's time to grow up, stuff like that. I was fortunate, my parents never really encouraged me to continue to look at this stuff and be interested in it, but they never discouraged me either. They never put their foot down and said, all right, that's enough of this shit, you're done.
Mm-hmm.
They never did that. So and maybe that's why I've had a lifetime of interesting things that have happened,
More open mind to it.
I think you have to be, I mean, especially nowadays. Everybody's preaching you got to be open-minded, you got to accept everything, right? You got to accept things that just don't make sense to you. You got to accept people that don't make sense to you. You got to accept everything, right? But yet it seems like more than not, we're not accepting of a whole lot anymore.
Right.
I don't know. I truly I wish people had. I wish they had the opportunity to have the perspective that I do on these things, because I think it really opens your mind to, whether you think everything in creation right now is already pretty damn awesome. It's even more incredible than you can believe when you open yourself to the possibility that all these things are. And I think they're all intertwined. I think, the spirituality, the ghosts, the UFO stuff, in some way, shape, or form, even with Sasquatch and Bigfoot and these other like one-off cryptids that, had their moment of fame, like the Mothman, the Wendigos, Skinwalkers, stuff like that. I think there's a thread of continuity that flows between all of it. To some extent, I think it's all there.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what the difference is. I don't know why some people see it and some don't. I don't know. I can understand not believing in it, because I think that's the way you're raised and your foundation.
Well, like you said, sometimes like you have to experience it first before you can believe it. Yeah. Like you have to have something happen to where you feel like it could be possible.
Right. You know,
For
my
some
son,
people, it doesn't happen.
my son spent a weekend up in the Manistee National Forest, which is just north of smack dab right in the center of Michigan. It's a very big wooded area. A lot of people go there camping. A lot of people go kayaking down the river. It's a really big piece of wooded area. And there's been a lot of reports of Bigfoot sightings. You can go to the BFRO website, Bigfoot Research Organization website, and you can find, throughout several years, Bigfoot reports from that area. People in the area tend to talk about it a lot, even if they haven't been officially reported. You can go to the Bigfoot Mapping Project, which is a really great resource. It's kind of an interactive app on your phone. You know, like if you're deciding to go camping in an area in whatever your respective states are, you can go to the Bigfoot Mapping Project and you can look up the area that you're going to be in, and you can find basically any of the sightings that have been reported. And it even gives you a little legend to tell you whether it was a vocalization, whether it was an eyes-on sighting, what time of day, what the weather conditions were. You know, a lot of information there. So if you're worried about it and you're deciding to go camping somewhere, you can actually look ahead and see if that area might be a hot spot, or if it's something that you're interested in finding. You know, it's a good indicator of maybe this might be a good place to look.
Right.
It's just, there's a lot of information out there, you know, and there's a lot. The thing that gets me is there are a lot of people who invest a good deal of their life to researching this stuff and talking about it and trying to make sense of it. And like good, smart, well-educated people.
Mm-hmm.
Why would you waste that much of your life on something if you didn't believe in it 100%?
Right.
If it wasn't something that drove you on a daily basis to stay involved with it, it just doesn't make sense that many people would spend that much time chasing after a legend, a folklore, you know, something that obviously wasn't real.
Right.
Yeah, definitely.
And that's kind of my standpoint on it. You know, it's like, that's why when I have people on the show, I go into it with a very open mind about hearing their experience, you know, because I mean, I haven't even scratched the surface as far as people's experiences on my show. There is so much weird shit out there that, you know, I mean, because you know, like when you start getting into the spirituality, you know, like ghosts and demons and stuff like that, that's only two out of a number of different things that are creepy crawly in the spiritual world, you know. When you really start getting into it, it's like there's hierarchies of, you know, boss demons and grunt workers and, you know, foot soldiers and all kinds of stuff. And I mean, there's a lot of stuff out there, man. And it's creepy, it's scary, it's cool, it's interesting. And I think the more that you open yourself to it and dig into it, even if it's something that you end up not buying into, I think the whole thing, expanded perspective, I think is a great way to, you know, go through life, being able to look at things from a number of different perspectives and you know, give everything a shot. You know, You may walk away from it saying, no, it's not for me. But then you might walk away from a lot of different things going, holy shit, maybe there is something to this. And that's what I love about doing the show, man. I love talking to people. I like to talk a lot, in case you haven't noticed. You know,
well, this is like your chance to finally let it out, because on you're usually interviewing people and they're the ones talking, you know,
right?
So this is your chance.
I love going on other shows because it does give me an opportunity to talk,
right?
And it's something I love doing. I just, you know, it's a lost art of communication. Having conversations with people nowadays is a real chore. because if you can't get them to look up from their phone, or they've got this social justice warrior attitude where they think they can just say whatever the hell they want to say and then dip out of a conversation, unscathed and no nothing coming back on them. I that's one thing about social media that I absolutely deplore is the not having any kind of backlash for anything that you say. Everybody feels so empowered now. Everybody thinks their opinion is way more important than what it really is. And I think if more people nowadays would spend time in conversation, they'd probably realize that hey, I might be off on this quite a bit, so maybe I just shut the hell up. Excuse me.
I think we should take a quick break and kind of mention our sponsor of the show, and get our guest a chance to win oil and butter from Educated Beards.
For the guest to win,
or for our chat room guest?
You're more welcome to win it as well.
You can enter too, Eric. You can enter.
You can
have access to YouTube right now. But Scott, do you have a video or?
Yep.
Okay.
So hashtag educated.
Miss Bruce City had a different idea, but
well, somebody's got to let me know about these things ahead of time. And then I think Chris is still in here. There was something else we wanted to share, which I can share here kind of quick.
Oh. So Chris missed the beginning of the show, and he might not be seeing this now, but
he was just in here not that long ago.
Jason was able to find this in the store, the True North guy, and dressed up like that at the beginning of the show. So if you guys missed it, watch it on the replay. So Educated Beards promotes healthy hair, eliminates itching, irritation, beard rough, and gives control over your beard. Educated lifestyle, support veterans, veteran-owned company. And Educated Beards right now, they're in Halifax. They're doing a show up there. And very soon here, I think either tomorrow or Saturday, they're going to be announcing something pretty cool that happened. I can't say anything yet, though. But they've been recognized for something, and we'll be hearing about it soon. Something really cool.
Yeah, well, we'll be able to talk about it on a future show.
Yeah, absolutely.
So anybody who's interested in the giveaway, just hashtag educated. A few good cents. Miss Bruce City also brought something up to me. Why do they only have a couple of cents? And I thought it was maybe because they use essential oils just for scenting.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons. That they don't use any fragrance oils or even fragrance essential oils. They just use essential oils for their fragrances. However, also I think they at some point they would like more scents, but they're in over 3,000 stores. Producing that much is a lot. That's a lot of money. So they're kind of limited on what they can do at a time. So I think every year they do come out with something. Like this year was the butter. Last year was the pomade. The year prior was the balsam eclipse, and then the unscented. So it seems like every year something else will come out, but it's because of stock, really.
Yeah. I see Chris is in here. And Laced and Based asked, did the True North guy costume come with Crocs?
Show that True North pick again. That Spirits Halloween. Oh my gosh. And Jason had it on perfect. I don't know. Maybe we should put our costumes back on at the end of the show.
Or you can always watch it on the replay.
Yeah. Oh, I think we probably got everyone entered, right?
Yeah, I guess so.
That's cool. Let's roll. I shift focus. You are the winner.
That is not how I read that. I'm glad I wasn't the one reading that out loud.
Oh.
So I shift focus. Reach out to Educate Beards on IG. Or if you don't have IG, you can reach out on email. You can email the company. And let them know that you won beard oil and butter on the Bearded Respect. Let them know what scent you would like and your address.
Otherwise, if you can't get a hold of them, just reach out to the Bearded Respect on IG, or you can email us at the beardedrespect@gmail.com.
So Eric, I've listened to a couple of shows, and the first one was, Scott introduced me to episode 5, which you had mentioned made you feel uncomfortable. Yeah. And I hope you're still on good terms with this person after listening to that show.
Yeah. I don't go over to their house very often, but
but that was pretty intense. Had you ever had that feeling again? Because that was like early in your career in the podcast, and you've had several episodes afterwards. Like, has that happened again where you felt like that eeriness or saw something or?
Yeah, and that's a long story, but the answer to that is yes. And I think I touched on this a little while ago. I said that, my episodes has taken a shift away from Bigfoot for whatever reason. And I've been getting contacted by light workers and witches and psychics and people who are more attuned with the spiritual nature of things. And it has, it seems like it's ramping up a little bit in my life. I don't claim to be anything other than a guy that does a podcast, and I've seen some weird things. I've experienced some weird things. I've never ever decided that I'm a psychic or I'm a medium or anything like that. But it's interesting that several of these that I've had on have all told me that I am an empath. And I guess it makes some sense because, the one thing that I get told a lot through comments, people leaving reviews, people who have emailed me, guests that I've had on that have told me afterwards that even though the show is called Uncomfortable, I have an ability to make them extremely comfortable, whether they're listening to me or, being interviewed by me, or they just always seem to, and when I say this, I feel like I'm patting myself on the back, and I don't mean to, but I have to start paying attention to it because it comes up so often. They tell me how comfortable they are with me in that space of being able to talk about these things. So I think to some extent, maybe I am empathic in that I deal with the emotion of what they're saying, and at a deeper level than just a superficial conversation, maybe. But I've noticed that I start to get more impressions from people now. I start to get more. It makes it. It seems like I'm having an easier time understanding their thought process, their perspective. It doesn't seem as difficult for me to wrap my head around where they're at and what they're experiencing. So I don't know if that's got anything to do with what these people are saying. I'm an empath or what. But I can tell you this, that with that ramping up that seems to be going on in my life, it has kind of come to a head here very recently. Off air, we were talking about me heading down to Tennessee to do a large, very long podcast with Tony Merkel from the Confessionals, Justin and Jay from the Cryptids of the Corn podcast, and then Joel Thomas from the band Van Tesla, but he's also now co-host of Kill the Mockingbirds podcast. Joel came on my show. We did a couple of episodes together. He's got some crazy theories, and kind of weaves a thread between extraterrestrials and them actually portraying themselves as extraterrestrial, but they're actually fallen angels, and it's trying to draw attention away from religion and stuff like that. On my most recent episode with him, it was called Portal Babies. We ended up having an exorbitant amount of electronic interference, and from the get-go, when it first started, I was having a weird, and I've used this equipment that I have that I'm talking to you on right now. I've used this equipment well over 100 times. It is the only equipment I use when I do my podcasts. I'm very well used to how it behaves, how it acts, and there are no issues with it. That's why I bought it, is because it is tried and true, and it is put out by a company named Rode, who is a huge name in audio. They're out of Australia. So when I bought this, I bought it specifically because it is trusted, and I started having issues with like the touch screen on the pad itself. Was jiggling back and forth, like it just got kind of blurry. I had a weird low frequency pulse that was coming through my ear monitors. There was a clicking noise that was repetitive, but wasn't following any real pattern. It was random. Very much sounded like a very old computer when you had the mouse that really made a loud click when you clicked on it. He couldn't hear it. I could hear it, but it didn't end up recording on the SD card. It didn't show up in the recording. We were using something similar to StreamYard. It's called Zencaster. Pretty much does the same things. And we ended up getting kicked off of Zencaster 10 times total during the process of trying to record. I sent him the invite to the Zencaster room, but he was the only one that was receiving notifications that we were getting bumped off the server. You would think that it would be coming to me since I was the one that initiated the invite, but it was actually going to him. So eventually we got the whole thing recorded. What's nice about Zencaster is Zencaster will let him record his part locally where he's at, and then I can retrieve that audio. And when I put it together in the editing suite, it sounds like we're both sitting in the same room rather than somebody being on a phone call. A lot nicer for listener experience. When it came time for me to retrieve it, I couldn't. He had to email me his portion of it. The first 2 times that he emailed me, there were 2 parts, and each one of them was 20 minutes long. Well, we recorded for like an hour and a half, hour and 3/4. So 20 minutes and 20 minutes doesn't equal up. And good night, Wendy. I almost, you know what? Looking at that picture of her, I'd almost guess that woman has red hair for some reason. I don't know why I think that, but she's rather attractive too, isn't she? He ends up sending it to me 3 times. I finally have to retrieve it from him through Google Drive in order to get the whole show. So the whole thing was just a mass of difficulty to get that show done. Then he goes on to do an episode with the gentleman from the Cryptids of the Corn, and completely off topic, completely different show, not talking about any of the stuff he was talking with me about. But at one point, he does kind of start to go down that same road, talking about fallen angels and the Nephilim and, you know, evil spirits and all this stuff. And all of a sudden, their recording equipment, which is completely different than my recording equipment. In fact, theirs runs on a battery backup. So if there is a power interruption, it automatically kicks over to the 4-hour battery that it has. And they have the same thing. Their entire system goes down. No power to it whatsoever, yet it's still plugged into the same outlet that the computer is going, and the computer is fine. So they had to pull all their stuff apart, restart everything, and then eventually were able to finish the recording. But they said, all right, that's enough. We're not talking about that stuff anymore. And then they were able to finish their thing. Well, then about a month later, Joel goes on to the Confessionals podcast to record, I think the episode was called Rise of the Nephilim. And they start talking about the same thing that he talked about on my episode and the same thing he was talking about on the Cryptids episode. And about 35, 40 minutes into it, what they did not realize was that Tony's Rodecaster, which is the same exact equipment I have, stopped working. And to the extent that he literally had to go buy a brand new one because the one that he was recording on is no longer functioning. It would not hook up to his computer. It would not hook up to the computer that he was using all along. It's basically sitting on a shelf in his studio now, a worthless hunk of junk. So when that happened, Joel started telling him that, hey, this happened when I was recording with Eric. This happened when I was recording with Justin and Jay. And then Tony was like, all right, screw it. Let's get everybody down. Good night, Laura. Thanks for popping in tonight. She's pretty too, isn't she?
You get all the girls coming in here.
Yeah.
Tony says, screw it. Let's get everybody involved down here to my studio and see if we can get it to happen again. So
Are we making a love connection?
well, I think maybe we are. Wow. So we do. We set up a date, and that date was October 15th. I took Friday the 14th off, and I drove from South Bend, Indiana, down to Tennessee. And the number of things that don't make any sense that happened during my travel. I told you this before we went on air. GPS showed me at about a 7.5-hour drive with 2 stops for gas, put me in there at about 8:15 at the latest. It ended up taking me 11 hours to get there. I had multiple people reaching out to me via Instagram, via text messages, via phone calls, wanting to know what the hell was going on, why everything was, why I wasn't there. And I had no real good answer for them. I will tell you that, and I would like, I can't do it justice here because it would take 4.5 hours. But I would encourage everybody to go listen to the latest episode, and it's going to take you a while because it literally is like 4 hours and 20-some minutes. But basically, I saw something in the sky that was a cloud. It was a cloud. It looked like a cloud. It didn't act like a cloud, but it looked like a cloud. It didn't look like a UFO hidden behind a cloud. It didn't look like anything mechanical behind the cloud. It didn't look like something that was disguised as a cloud. It was a fucking cloud. But the cloud changed as I was watching it. And I was stopped in traffic at the Lexington exit on 75. And it captured my attention. I watched it for a while as it did its thing. When I finally got down to the bed and breakfast or the Airbnb down in Tennessee, come to find out that all three of I left from South Bend, Indiana, Joel left from Cincinnati, Ohio, and the boys from the Cryptids left from Ada, Ohio. But all of our routes all converged with getting to exit 75 in Kentucky. And then from that point on, it was a straight shot to Tennessee. Come to find out that when I sat down and started to tell them what I saw in the sky, everybody kind of jumped out of their seats and said, holy shit, we saw that when we were there. And we couldn't believe it because it was the only cloud in the sky. And it literally, there was not another cloud in the sky. And when I looked off to my left-hand side, there were trees off the side of the highway, and the leaves were blowing. It wasn't super windy, but there was some wind. The thing that was weird was that the cloud that I was seeing was up and to the right of the water tower in Lexington. It's a big-ass water tower right there on 75. It says Lexington, and then underneath it, I think it says like the Jewel of Kentucky or something like that. And that cloud was not moving with the amount of wind that was blowing. It was not moving to the left. It wasn't moving to the right. It wasn't moving farther away from me. It wasn't moving towards me and over me. But it was kind of rolling on top of itself. So if anybody knows what like a 3D rendering program is on a computer, like where you can create a box in this program, and then you can take it and with your mouse you can move the box so you can see all the sides and the top and the bottom. That's kind of how this cloud was moving. It was like slowly rotating on itself, and then even had some rotation in the opposite way. But it never stopped looking like a cloud. But it ended up changing and becoming this kind of like an insignia. It broke into 3 parts, and it kind of went into an odd triangular shape. But I got this like really powerful feeling that it was like spiritual. It was like angelic, or like Holy Trinity type shit. That's the feeling that I got from it, and it kind of freaked me out. Not really in a bad way, but I literally out loud I said, I don't know what the hell I'm looking at here. What the hell is going on? And I mean, my logical mind is, the wind's blowing a little bit, and maybe a wind current came through and it kind of broke up the cloud a little bit, and it was just, my eyes were playing tricks on me. It just was kind of putting two and two together, and it's like, oh, that looks like, that looks like Charlie Brown in the clouds, or an elephant, or but when I got down and found out that the other two cars had seen that same cloud acting in the same way, but not transforming into the final shape that I saw, that was bizarre. And it was not, they listened to my whole story and they were like, oh yeah, I saw that too, and it did exactly what you're saying. It wasn't that. I started to tell the story, and the one guy, Joel, he jumps up out of his chair and he's like, holy shit, I saw that same freaking cloud right there by the water tower. And then Justin stood up and he pointed at his partner, Jay, and Jay looked over at me and he's like, yeah, we saw that cloud. It was the only cloud in the sky. And I'm like, all right, screw you guys. You're messing with me now. And they're like, no, seriously, we saw it. So I went over to the credenza and I grabbed a couple of pieces of paper and I had everybody draw what they saw. And I said, as soon as you get done drawing it, flip it upside down. That's it. And then I drew what I saw. But then on the back side of the paper, I drew what I saw it turn into. And then right at that point that we got done, Tony from the confessionals walked into the Airbnb and he's like, hey, you guys, how's everything going? And blah, blah, blah. And I said, all right, enough with that. You go and collect everybody's picture that they drew and then tell me what you see. Because I didn't even see what they drew. And he walks over and he gets everything and he's like, I don't know what the hell you guys are doing. Is this some kind of, you guys playing a game or, what the hell is going on? And I'm like, just look at the pictures. And he's like, he's got all three of them in his hand and he's looking at it and he's like, okay, so y'all drew the same exact cloud. So what? And when he said that, I was like, oh shit. Right. And then I said, all right, now take mine and flip it over and look at the other side. And it you know what the yin and yang symbol looks like? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. So if you pulled the black and the white yin and yang symbol apart and you took the white one, that was kind of what the cloud turned into. Something, it didn't have sharp edges. It wasn't a perfectly formed anything. It still looked like cloud material, whatever that is, water vapor or whatever creates clouds. But it ended up being three of those kind of tadpole looking shapes that were positioned. One was on the bottom, one was on the left side, one was on the right side. It kind of looked like a triangle. And it became very apparent that all three of us had seen the same thing because everybody drew the same exact cloud. It had a very distinctive bottom to the cloud. It wasn't puffy and billowy. It was kind of jagged, almost like it had tendrils coming out of the bottom of it. It was weird. And that shocked me. And then this light worker that I'm very good friends with that lives out in California, the next day on Saturday, when we were actually going into the studio, she knew I was going down there. And my intent of going down there to have this discussion was that I felt that there was some kind of an attachment to the gentleman who we were all interviewing that we were having the electronic experiences with. I felt there was something not necessarily invited by him or, not possessing him, but there was something attached to what he was doing. And I wanted to bring that up. And this light worker out of California, she said that, there's a potential there for there being some nastiness. So she's like, I'm going to bathe you in light and I'm going to put a protective bubble around you and all this stuff. And it's like, hey, it can't hurt. Right. So
right.
Do your thing, man.
Yeah.
Keep me safe. So Saturday I wake up in the morning and I was like, okay, it was around noon that we were going to go meet Tony at the studio. I told the guys, I said, come on, let's go get breakfast. So we went to Cracker Barrel. I was hot. I was just like overheated. And I thought, it took me 11 hours to drive down there. I only got like 4 hours of sleep. I just wasn't feeling it. I was just like overheated feeling, not like I had a fever, but I was really hot. And I was sitting in the back seat of the car when we were going to get breakfast. and the window wouldn't roll down. The power window button was broken, so I couldn't get any fresh air. And then when we ended up leaving Cracker Barrel to come back, we came back to the Airbnb. We got our equipment. We're headed over to Tony's, and then we took a different car. And I was like, God damn, dude, can you turn on the air conditioner or something? Because I'm just like burning up. And so he did. And, we got to the studio. By that time, Tony was hungry. He wanted to go have lunch. So we went and got pizzas, and we came back to the studio. And we walked into the studio, and it was god awful hot in the studio. And I'm like, oh my God, I can't catch a break, man. I'm just, I'm like soaked. I'm just burning up. And he's like, man, I'm going to turn the air conditioner on. So he walks down the hallway of the studio. He turns on the air. And then he goes in and does a separate episode with the two guys from the Cryptids of the Corn. And then after that, we're all going to go in and we're going to talk about why we were all there. So I'm sitting out in the front of the booth, or the front of the lobby of his studio. And Joel is sitting beside me, the guy who causes all the interference. And I get a text message from this light worker that's in California. And her message to me is just out of the clear blue, says, hi, hun, just wanted to let you know I'm popping in and out on you, checking make sure everything's all right. If you're getting too hot, let me know. I can back off the bubble a little bit, but I don't want to do it too much because I don't want you to be at risk. And I was like, okay, so of all the things that a psychic could say that would be vague and nondescript that might make you go, I wonder if that's real.
Right.
She hits on the fact if you're too hot. And from the minute I got up that morning, I was like, holy shit, man, I am hot. I just couldn't cool off. And I was like, I didn't respond to that text. I was just kind of floored by how did she pick that? Of all the things she could have sent me a message about, how did she pick that? And then she followed that text with a message that simply said 222, the numbers 222, 3 of them in a row. And I looked at it and I sent her back. I said, sweetheart, you got to do better than that, because I don't know what the hell that means. And she's like, neither do I, but it'll become apparent, so keep your eye out for it. And I was like, so a couple of minutes go by, and I was like, I start thinking, it's like, how in the hell did she know that I was too hot? So I'm like, maybe, there's something to this, right? So I look over at Joel, and I showed him my phone, and I said, I don't want to be the only one that knows this. 222. I don't know what. She doesn't know what. All she says is it's going to be apparent. I said, so now you know. So if something comes up throughout the course of the rest of the day and it points to 222, I'm not the only crazy mother around here. And he's like, okay, whatever. And he's doing his own thing. So we go in and we record the episode. Obviously, it's 4.5 hours. We did take a little bit of a break, so there's probably a half hour in between finishing it before we went back and did the second part. We got done, and then we decided to just sit around the table and try to start piecing together like timestamps from my phone as far as where I knew where I was, phone calls I knew that I had, where I was at like a truck stop that ended at a specific time, started at a specific time, and tried to piece together where the difference in the time was, right, in why it took me so long to get down there. And we kind of started putting some things together, but it wasn't adding up. There was like, even on the outside end of me being, in traffic for a while or slowed down because of a traffic stop for a while, even adding extra time to that, there was still like 90 minutes that didn't make any damn sense. It didn't make any sense. Why did it take me so long to go that distance? And I think I even said maybe before we started recording, I would have had like that last leg of the trip, I would have had to average like 31.5 miles an hour the rest of the way down there for it to take me that long. So we were going through that and everything. And then I was like, so Joel left at a certain time. The other guys left at a certain time. I left at 10:30 in the morning. And through some way, we determined that Joel, who was the closest to Tennessee, he got to the Lexington exit on 75 at 2:00 in the afternoon. The guys from the Cryptids of the Corn, they were 2 hours behind him. They got there at 4:00. And my timestamp from text messages that I knew I was receiving while I was looking at that cloud showed 6:02. So 2:00, 4:00, and 6:00. And then it hit me, and I'm getting the chills again. It was like 2:22.
Right.
And I looked over at Joel and I said, holy shit. I think I even said it in the episode. I was like, holy shit, 2:22. And then there's like silence, and everybody is like, holy shit. So there's a lot of things that point to a lot of weird shit that happened. Tony got touched while he was at our Airbnb. He saw a lit up little ball that kind of shot from the side of the couch that he was sitting on to behind the chair that I was sitting at, which kind of freaks me out a little bit because I was thinking it's like, holy shit, was something trying to attach to me? I got touched on the top part of my palm, or on the top part of my hand, or down by my pinky, with maybe like 15 or 20 minutes left to the recording. And I literally thought that the guy sitting next to me, Jay, at the end of the table, because him and his buddy Jay, they're those guys that are always kind of like, like touching you or poking you or doing some kind of touchy feely shit that, it's like, God, stop, enough. And I literally thought that he had taken his finger and like brushed across my hand. And I pulled back and I was like, and I looked at him and he wasn't even paying attention to me. He was half asleep. And I was like, holy shit, that's weird. I just got touched. And Tony had an experience while we were recording that I had made a statement, and then he heard my words repeat to him a second time inside his headphones, but only in his right ear. None of us heard it. Then he got touched while we were at the Airbnb Friday night and saw that ball of light. That I don't even know that he necessarily saw a ball of light. It was just like a flash of something that darted between the couch and the chair. So there was just
So were you the only one that experienced that 3 hours of lost time? Was it lost time, or is it?
I don't know, man. See, that's the whole thing. The more and more that I've been thinking about it, because that's what everybody started saying. Oh, lost time. That cloud. It was UFO, and we were laughing and we were giggling and cutting up about it, but it was a very real thing. So it was funny, but it was kind of unnerving because honestly, I really don't know what the hell happened. There's no logical reason that I should have been that late.
Right.
But at one point, I got the overwhelming feeling with about an hour to go. And here's a big one. At 8:00 Friday night, at 8:00, while I'm on the road, a number of things, really interesting things happened. One is someone messages me that first a phone call comes through, and it's Joel from the Airbnb, and he's like, dude, where are you? And I'm like, man, I still got like 90 minutes to go yet. It's saying I'm not getting there till 9:34. And he's like, well, shit's starting to pop off here at the Airbnb already. He's like, the power just went out at the Airbnb. We have no power. And I was like, no shit. And I'm like, holy shit, that's something that happens with Joel all the time. And I'm like, what were you doing? And he's like, I was just getting ready to go on and do a recording with L.A. Marzulli, who is he's a very popular guy in the genre of giants and Nephilim and all the stuff, pre-flood Bible stuff. And he said, we were getting ready to record an episode on the angelic wars on Mars. And I was like, my eyes were rolling back in my head. I'm like, angelic wars on Mars. Come on, give me a break, dude. But
Wait, you don't believe that?
it plays into the same shit that he's talked about on my show and the other shows when this stuff happens. And I'm like, okay, so that's weird. Well, then I get a message on, I think it was on Instagram, from a woman who followed me and says that she had just put her phone down, and I think she was listening to an episode of mine, and then put her phone down on the end table. And when she did, the SLS Ghost app that was on her phone opened by itself, and she picked her phone up, and in front of her in her apartment, way out on the West Coast in Oregon, has this like little green stick figures that's supposed to be recognizing a ghost standing in front of her in her apartment. And she said, I just felt the need to reach out to let you know that I think it's here for you. And I'm like, that's freaking weird. Joel's telling me that the power just went out at the Airbnb. And then another person that I was talking to when I pulled in a truck stop in Richmond, Kentucky, had tried to call me back a couple of times, and my finger would not respond to this touch screen on my phone. I wasn't able to open the app to answer the phone, and my phone was in a cradle that was on a suction cup on the windshield, so I wasn't going to take it down out of that because that's where my GPS was. And she called twice, and I couldn't answer the phone. And then she called a third time, and I was like, oh, shit, I'm being stupid. All I got to do is push the button on my car, to answer the phone. I didn't have to touch the screen. So I hit the button on the car, and it went to the app like it was going to answer the call. But then it swiped off the screen, and my GPS came back up. So the third time, it wouldn't let me answer it. But I was able to swipe up and get to my messages, and I sent her a message just saying, because I'm reaching like up to my windshield, and I text her and I said, I'm okay. I just can't answer the phone. I wasn't going to put all that because, I'm okay.
All right.
All of this is happening at 8:00. And then Tony sends me a message. He's like, bro, where are you at? And I'm like, dude, I'm trying to get there. I don't know what the problem is. But at that point, I was really, honestly, seriously, in my heart, honest to God, I was feeling that something was slowing my progress. It wasn't, I didn't turn off and take the wrong exit. I didn't get delayed an hour because of detours. I just felt like there was something acting on me that was slowing my progress. And it didn't make any sense because I follow my GPS religiously. I use it all the time. I've got an iPhone. It's a newer iPhone. It's updated. It's always accurate. You can almost to the minute most times it'll show your arrival time, not being much different than, unless you stop for an hour or whatever. And I was getting the overwhelming sense that something was slowing my progress. I never felt like it was trying to keep me from getting there or that it was trying to, divert me. It just was slowing my progress. And after it was all over and done with, late Friday night, one of the other gentlemen from Ada, Ohio, from the Cryptids of the Corn, Jay, he gets a text message from his house in Ada, Ohio, saying that the power just came back on. And he was like, what do you mean? And she said, well, the power went out at 8:00 here at the house. Well, the power went out in Ada, Ohio at 8:00. It went off at 8:00 in Knoxville, Tennessee, completely unrelated. But the really bizarre thing was like when my GPS told me I was like 10 minutes away and I turned off the highway and I was going down some back roads, getting into the neighborhoods and getting closer and closer to the Airbnb. When my GPS said, you've arrived, your location is on the right, I stopped. I turned my wheels and started pulling into the driveway of the Airbnb. When I pulled in and my headlights hit the gravel road, the gravel driveway, the lights to the Airbnb came on. And, it's just a bunch of weird shit,
Right.
man.
Right.
Just stuff that doesn't make sense. But when I put everything together, you either got to look at it as a series of really weird coincidences. Still can't explain the time thing. I don't have any period where I don't know where I was. I don't have any periods that I was like, oh, I don't remember getting from Indianapolis to Lexington, Kentucky.
Right.
There was one point where I was surprised that I was in Kentucky because I was like, holy shit, I made it through Indiana already, but the time lined up and I just was like, I was expecting to go through a lot of Indianapolis traffic, but I went far enough around that I didn't run into any of that. So it was a pretty quick drive and just nothing matches up. Nothing lines up, but it feels like there was something intentional acting on me to keep me from getting there at 8:00. And, 8:00 should have been my good arrival time with taking two fuel stops.
Mm-hmm.
Because originally it was 7:30, 2 gas stops plus taking a leak and grabbing a sandwich at the Buc-ee's truck stop should have put me there at 8. And that's when everything kind of started popping off. And I don't know why I wasn't there. And if I was there, part of me wants to think that, if what Tony saw was real, darting between the sofa and the chair, if I would have been there at 8:00, my mind just starts to kind of go all over the place. It's like, was Joel, who all these experiences happened because of, were Joel and I kind of up for grabs? And if I would have been there at 8:00 when the power went out, could this thing have attached to me? Or, I don't know.
Yeah.
It was really bizarre. And I've got pages and pages of notes that I'm trying to put cohesively together so I can release, like a half-hour episode just based on that travel.
Yeah.
And all the
Yeah,
things
that'll
I
be interesting.
experienced. So the fact that those kind of things are happening to me now leads me to believe that the further I get into this, the more open I am to it. That those things are kind of starting to migrate towards me a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if I'm super excited about that. I guess if everything stays kind of benign, it's fine. But if things start popping off and getting real wacky, I'm probably like, yeah, you know what?
Right. Yeah.
So
Yeah. Yeah, like the one guy in a recent episode said, it's really cool that it happened looking back at it, but I really didn't enjoy it during it.
yeah. I don't know, man. I'm really still having a tough time wrapping my noggin around all of it. And
Right.
and the thing is, at the end of the day, I think we say this at the end of the show. This is just, we really got the feeling that this is just the beginning. And I don't know why it's, Tony's a big show. So I get that he's got a huge voice and a lot of listeners, but me, I'm a relative nobody. The Cryptids of the Corn are, pretty much in the same spot I am. We got great shows and, we're having some success and they're growing, but why us? What is it just by chance that we're involved in this, or is there something predetermined that, it's supposed to be us? Because I'm nobody special. I've got no special abilities or powers or anything like that. you know, and it just makes me wonder, why are we involved in this? And what's it going to end up? What's the end game? Because I mean, really, I think when you look at this world, the state that it's in right now, if you have any kind of belief in you know, a creator and spirituality and, you know, good and evil, on that side of the veil anyway, I think when you look at the way this world is going, I think you'd be silly not to be able to look at it and say that there's a conflict, between good and evil that's going on. So I don't know. I don't know where we fall into that or why we fall into it. You know, I mean, really somebody that's got, you know, way more religious experience or knowledge than me would be better apt to be dealing with this kind of stuff than me. I don't know. It's bizarre. I enjoy it. I'm happy to be a part of it. Like I said, as long as it doesn't get too nutty, too crazy. I don't really want to wake up and start seeing dark figures in the corner with red glowing eyes. Not for me. I don't really want that experience. So,
Right.
But I'm afraid that it's kind of starting to lean that way. Hopefully, if anything, I see good, light, bright, sunshiny spirits
The happy ones. The
that
nice-
exude love and goodness.
Yeah.
So,
Well,
Yeah.
at that, Eric, I think we're going to call it a night. I know someone in here has to get up early in the morning.
yeah, I do too. So that my dog just crawled up on my lap and he's looking at me like, dude, it's time to go to bed, man.
So at that, where's the best place for people to catch your podcast?
Uncomfortable Podcast, the best. It's available on all the platforms: Apple, Spotify, Google Podcast, Overcast, every cast. Basically, it's on Amazon. You can get it on Alexa now. I think the only place that I'm not at, and that's because I haven't tried to put it on there, is iHeartRadio. But the best thing that you can do is search Uncomfortable and then put my name, Erick, afterwards, ERICK. It'll come up with that logo you're seeing on the screen right now, and all my episodes are available there. If anybody's had a weird experience, whether it be Bigfoot or ghosts or hauntings or seen a UFO, if anybody wants to talk to me and tell their story, they can get a hold of me at contact.uncomfortable@gmail.com. You can follow me on Facebook, Instagram, all at Uncomfortable Podcast 65, and Twitter. I don't really do much with Twitter. I have an automatic feed that goes out every time a new episode's released, but I really don't. I don't tweet anything. I don't message people that way. Best way, surefire way to get a hold of me is contact.uncomfortable@gmail.com, and I promise I'll answer all emails. So,
I got one last question.
yes, sir.
How do you pronounce your last name?
I was wondering. It's pronounced Szilagyi.
Szilagyi. Okay.
Yep. Good old Hungarian name.
I was going to say, and that's Hungarian because that's what you told the witch.
Yep. Absolutely. Well, man, I really appreciate you guys having me on. This has been a ball.
Yeah,
I got
thank
to meet
you.
all of you. And
Thank you.
it was a lot of fun.
Oh,
Hopefully I didn't get too long-winded.
No, it was.
Oh, yeah.
He's like, dude,
Come on, Dad.
No,
I got to go outside and I want to go to bed.
Jason's a welder. He gets up pretty early.
that was pretty. No, it was real interesting. I mean, I'm going to have to catch some more of the podcast too. It'll take me a while to get caught up, but yeah, pretty interesting. That's for sure.
it's getting more interesting. You know, it really is on the personal side of things. It's really it's different, you know. And when you start thinking about like the things that I just got done telling you about that trip down there, when you start thinking about that in a serious tone, you know, and don't be dismissive of, well, I must have just not been paying attention to the clock, or, you know, maybe I was only going 40 instead of 75. When you start really paying attention to it, it gets weirder. It really does. It's like, I'm not prone to making those kind of mistakes. I'm not prone to, you know, if the speed, I'm not a speedster. If the speed limit's 75, I go 77, you know, 2 miles over. I'm never in that big of a hurry to get anywhere. You know, I always leave plenty of time to get there. And there's still 90 minutes that doesn't make sense. And that bothers me because, you know, you hear about missing time phenomenon, and when it's, you know, alien abductions, UFO encounters, you know, and I don't feel like, you know, I don't have any orifices on my body that were hurt. I wasn't feeling like anything transpired during that time. But
you may find out in 8 months.
Maybe. Yeah, I'll have the first bunghole baby alien popping out of my butt. I don't know. It's just can't get past the feeling that there was something intentional keeping me from getting down there when I was supposed to get there.
Right.
And that bothers me. That bothers me because I want to know why. So,
well, we'll have to stay tuned and see if you come up with any more answers.
I hope so.
Yeah.
All right, gentlemen. Thank you so much for having me on. I really appreciate it. It's been great meeting you. Hopefully your listeners enjoyed. And if you did, come over and check out the show, Uncomfortable Podcast. Got a lot of good stuff out there. So
absolutely.
More coming.
Everyone in the chat, thanks for hanging with us. I think they did enjoy it because they're still here. So
thanks for a good show, guys.
Yep.
Thanks, guys.
And we will talk to you next Thursday.